This is Rev Don Lewis coming to you from beautiful Metaverse. And I've noticed that my introduction seems to be getting cut off, so I'm trying to find exactly when to say that, but I'm going to say it again in case it was cut off. Hello, this is Rev Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful Metaverse, and more particularly from beautiful Danville, Illinois, the homeland of the Corellian tradition. And welcome to Midday with Rev Don. And as you know, whatever format you may be seeing this in, if you type your questions or comments on that platform, they'll appear here in my chat room and we can interact directly, which for me is one of the best parts of this daily broadcast, getting to talk to you directly. And I very much enjoy these conversations. I enjoy this time with you. Hello to Janet in the chat room. Good to see you, Janet. And I'm pleased that we have so many people joining us daily. And I'm hoping that we can have more people join us daily as we go forward. One of the things that I've decided, or been advised and decided that I should do, is I really need to talk about what I'll be talking about on any given day. So I'm looking at setting up some subjects that will be the plan to talk about on a given day. Hello to Mary in the chat room. Good to see you, Mary. Not that I may not, hello Bradley in the chat room. Good to see you, Bradley. Not that I may not depart from these. Hello, Michael in the chat room. But it will give us a place to start. And so watch for that change in future broadcasts. And again, just because it has been said doesn't mean it can't be changed. If you're here and we're talking and you have something you want to ask about, but it will give us a place to start our conversations. Hello to Anna in the chat room. And I figure we'll see what all different things we can talk about. There are so many, but what I would like is if you would recommend what you would like to hear me speak on. And I will take that into account. I'm thinking today I'm going to talk a little bit more about leadership. But once you create the event, it's hard. I found it hard to go back and change the description, so we didn't say that today. But I think that's what we'll talk about. Hello to Brenda in the chat room. And also, I noticed something about the camera, about disframing. And that is, I normally wear my rings more likely on my left hand. And the reason for that is that left is the psychic side, it's the receptive side, it's the goddess side. So more often than not, that's where I'm wearing rings. But I've noticed in these broadcasts, it's my right hand you actually see more often than not. So I've decided I should start wearing more rings on my right hand if I'm going to do it. So watch for more rings on the right hand. Now, Brenda has suggested how to connect to your personal spirits as a subject. And so I am going to write that down. And it will be the subject of one of our broadcasts this week. And, you know, maybe we'll make this into a mini class. And we shall, at the very least, have fun conversations about these things. And I think I will make that for tomorrow. And hello to Aiden in the chat room, who says that they're looking forward to that subject. But there are more comments that I missed. Thank you, Brenda. Brother Tuvsiata, which I may not be pronouncing correctly. Now, Anna says, I would like to understand more about being a Corellian. I'm a regular pagan Wiccan. Not sure I completely understand Corellian culture. What do I need to know to understand Corellian culture? Let me write that down. And I suppose that's an important question, um, and one that a subject that wouldn't have occurred to me simply because it's so second nature to me. But yes, we'll absolutely put that in. Maybe we'll do that on Wednesday. And Brenda says I did pronounce the name correctly. Thank you, Brenda. Um, pronunciation can be hit or miss depending um, on a number of things, including the fact that people just don't have universal pronunciation. But I'm usually pretty good. I have a broad background. So we will add those for Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. And please bring forward more subjects. As I was saying, I thought we would talk maybe a little bit more about leadership today as we go, because we were talking about leadership the other day. And, I've talked in so many different forums lately. I'm not entirely sure what I've said where. Saturday night, we had the Evening with the Corellian Ancestors on my Patreon. And my goodness, that was a wonderful event. It ended up going 3 hours or slightly over. To the point that we had to end it because we were all so tired. But as an evening, it was wonderful. And, in its way, it touched on leadership here and there. Hello, Lori, in the chat room. Good to see you, Lori. And, we decided that one evening with the Corellian Ancestors was not enough, and that we will be repeating this at my Patreon. It's open to all the patrons. And if you would like to join my Patreon, you can find it at revdonlewis.com. And Lori and Mary Cavalcante in the chat room, Lori Blackman, Mary Cavalcante were both there, and they both said that they loved it. And Mary says it was fun. It was fun. The Corellian Ancestors, as Lady Bitterwind once put it, were a bunch of rounders, meaning they were people who loved life and tended to take it on pretty frontally. They had some adventures, and we talked about a lot of them, including my grandmother's 3 husbands, my sister's unfortunate death, some interesting rituals that happened over the years. And Aiden says, I unfortunately missed the night with the ancestors. Is there any chance the recording will be available on Patreon or elsewhere? We did record it. It's not available just yet, but I think I will make it available on Patreon. And only for the patrons. But since Aiden is on my Patreon, yes, you should be able to see it fairly soon. I have to process the video because I don't know if anyone knows what I'm about to say, but when you record something on Zoom, it records very large. So I have to go through a process of changing the size before I can use it easily. Bradley says, I love the story where the door kept opening. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story right now, but I may have mentioned it on this broadcast before, but there was a ritual that we did once. The Corel Mother Temple at the home of Lady Bitterwind. And it had more physical manifestation than is normal for us. We are not physical mediums. We don't usually have that happen. It has occasionally happened. This is not the only incident, but it's not normal for us. But in this instance, as we were setting up for the ritual, the door kept opening despite the fact it was securely latched and there was no strong wind that day. But it kept opening, and we understood this to be the ancestors announcing their entrance, something they did not normally do. There was, however, a person with us that day in the form of my late wife, who came from a different background that did involve a little more physical manifestation, which might be possibly why that was happening that day, or maybe it was just the subject of that ritual, which was unusually important. It got told that night because well, all right, I guess I have to tell it, or it doesn't make any sense. But we're setting up the altar for the ritual, which was to bring the family property back to the family, which close to 40 years later has not happened yet, but that doesn't mean it won't. And as we're doing this, the door opens, and Lady Crystal said, it's probably the wind, but just in case, welcome, spirit. And when it closed the door, and we came back to setting up the altar, and the door opens again. And Lady Crystal says, welcome, spirit. Goes, closes the door, says, if that door opens again, it's going to have my attention. Came back, we continue setting things up, the door opens again. Now it's got all of our attention. And Lady Crystal says, welcome, spirit. And at this point, we're very conscious of how much energy is in this ritual, even though it's not begun yet. And so Lady Crystal went and closed the door, came back to the altar, and we hear knock at the door. And we all look at each other. Lady Crystal goes to open the door, and there's no one there physically. So she says, welcome, spirit, closes the door. And my late wife, who was a medium, as most of us in the room were, said that spirit was too young to open the door herself. And we believe that spirit was my late sister, Linda, who died at the age of 4, and my wife's late daughter, Tiana, who also died at the age of 4, and that they were together. And for a time, they were often seen together. One of the bigger physical manifestations we've had, because again, it's not what we do. There certainly have been more remarkable physical manifestations in the history of the world, but for us, that was unusually large. Usually what happens for us is, a photo may fall, which when you're working with spirits has meaning. Some other things will happen, but usually, because we never look for physical manifestations, it's not how things came to us, but that day it did. And Brenda says, dang. That's how we felt. It really got our attention. And it's never lost my attention. And it's interesting, not one person who was in that room in that ritual is still living but me. Which is, I've talked before about how it's kind of a sobering thing to realize you're the last one standing of that generation. Well, I beg your pardon, Lady Crystal is still living. But of the temple members, no one is living. Hopefully that was not a sign. But Lady Crystal is actually doing quite well. And I'm sure she'll be with us for several more years. So Lady Crystal and I are the only two still standing. But it's still sobering. Lady Bitterwind is gone. My late wife is gone. Even Mary Rufford is gone now. And she was here for so long. But on the other hand, I was also the youngest person in the room. And so it's Lady Crystal and I. 44 years in as First Priesthood, still standing, not going anywhere. And hopefully that was merely a slip of the tongue. But there we are. And the office of First Priesthood is held for life. It cannot be resigned. Once properly conferred, which involves the vote of the Witan, it cannot be removed, at least not by any mechanism currently existing. But you can retire in office and propose a coadjutor. And currently both Lady Crystal and I have coadjutors, co-regents, who are handling those daily affairs, and they have all the dignity of that office, and presumably would be confirmed by the Witan after our death, but only after our death. That's how that works. It's how it's always worked. And without the vote of the Witan, it really cannot be considered to be official or authentic. only in the sense of being a co-regent, because the first priesthood have the right to simply appoint a co-regent, but the successor must be voted upon. I'm aware that there are those who seek to change that, but I recognize no such changes, and I am hopeful that Watan itself will recognize no such changes, because as a fundamental right of the Watan, it's vitally important that they retain it. And Lady Crystal and I are both quite dedicated to making certain that that, in fact, remains the case. Simply having retired in office does not in any way lessen either of our commitment to the tradition and to its people. And speaking of leadership, that's part of what leadership is about. It's not about your own ego. It's not about enjoyment, although you can really enjoy your office. But it's not why you're there. You're there for duty. You're there to serve the people who look to you. It's not, certainly not to stroke your ego and to preen. And I've said before, the reason the Corellian state robes get heavier as you go is to remind you that these are heavy offices that carry heavy responsibility, not just privileges to stroke your ego. And the first priesthood properly wear the heaviest robes of all. And it should be that way. Should not be getting easier as you go. As we stand now, the outer court have the least obligation to robes, but they also have the least obligations. They're there because they have chosen this as their path, their religion to identify with, either exclusively or as one of many. And the simplicity of their garb reflects that. The priesthood have progressively heavier robes, showing that they have heavier responsibilities and reminding them of those responsibilities. And I know that some people feel the robes are not entirely comfortable, but honestly, the offices should not be entirely comfortable either. You should always feel the responsibility. I always felt the responsibility. And when I designed those robes, and the vast majority I designed, I never forgot that. It's part of what I wanted them to reflect. And, future generations may change them. They may feel that it's too complex, it's too heavy, whatever. That's their business. But why they are as they are now is that I felt they needed to reflect the heaviness of the responsibilities you're taking on. When you become high priesthood, you take on a lot of responsibilities, even if you're not running a temple. Far more than a first degree could ever be expected to hold, at least in and of itself. Now, that first degree may have an office with heavy responsibilities, and that's another matter, but many of those offices carry their own regalia. If you're going to be a temple head, yes, you should have more difficult regalia because you have a more difficult position and more to live up to. And, God knows if you're going to be the first priesthood, the idea that your robes are complex should be the least thing you're thinking about. It should always remind you. Oh, and hello to Lilith in the chat room. Lilith says, what's the subject? Today the subject is leadership. And right now we're talking about Corellian regalia and why it is the way it is. So recently, the United Kingdom had a coronation. And the central feature of that coronation, of course, is wearing the crown. And I think it's obvious to look at the thing that that's a heavy piece of equipment. And particularly if you consider the late Queen Elizabeth, who was not a large person, at the age of 25, wearing that crown was a thing. I believe in the fictionalized television series, The Crown, they showed her practicing wearing it because it was necessary to do so. And there's a reason for that, to remind the monarch of the weight of the office they're taking on. Now, of course, being Corellian priesthood is not being a monarch or anything like running the United Kingdom, with or without the constitutional quality of the monarchy. It's a priesthood, but it carries its own responsibilities. And, you know, I know because I've been told endless times that the robes can be heavy. They can be very warm in some parts of the world. They can be difficult to keep straight. And I myself sometimes had difficulty keeping all those layers in line. But again, the reason is to remind you of what you're doing. If you are a temple head, if you are an elder, if you're archpriesthood, and especially the first priesthood, you do have a lot of things to keep in line. Having to think about those robes should only remind you of your duty to the people, which is the reason you're there. Without the members, what would we need all these priesthood for? Without the members, why would we need archpriesthood or elders, let alone first priesthood? There'd be no point. And yes, we were once a small familial tradition, but we still had members, and the leadership still had responsibility. If anything, they felt it just as keenly or more so then. And it's something we cannot forget. And, you know, in the degree books, we talk about how leadership is part of a social contract. We talk about the social contract, I think, in general terms, but in particular in how we live. Everything in life is part of a social contract. And you know, this could be a whole half-hour conversation on its own, but when we talk about, for example, priesthood, people have certain expectations that come from the social contract between the priesthood of any given tradition and their members. And they expect certain things. You know, I was talking the other day, think on this broadcast, but possibly one of the other places I've been speaking, because I've been speaking in a lot of places lately, that in the 44 years that I was actively first priest on a daily basis, and the fewer number of years I was chancellor, there was never a time that I threw anyone out of this tradition or penalized them in any way for having a disagreement with me. Because my attitude, and the only acceptable attitude in my opinion, is that of course people can disagree. You don't enter an organization and give up your right to disagree with people. Working against them might be different. Doing harm certainly is a different thing, but disagreeing with someone, that's not a cause to take action against anyone. And I never did. People who remember the one-time high priest at Spiral Light Temple, which I pointed out on Saturday night, will remember that he disagreed with me on many occasions, including very publicly. And although he eventually left the tradition, he did so on his own volition, not because I threw him out, because he had the right to disagree. Now, I'll grant you, I don't feel he had the right to necessarily become publicly insulting. But privately, we could have whatever private conversations there were. That's not why you take action against people. It's not right. I'm not sure it's not even legally actionable. But anyone who you ever saw thrown out of this tradition, there have been some, either committed a criminal act, such as Waco Tohausen, or there had been almost at least several months and usually about 2 years of attempts to counsel them and bring them back to good behavior. Obviously, if they crossed into something criminal, it was another matter. And the Waco Tohausen case involved child abuse that occurred outside of the tradition, but nonetheless, Our policy on that, um, then and now, was that once legally accused, you were suspended of your priesthood. And if found guilty, or in this case, he pled guilty, you are expelled. No further conversation. Had he been found innocent, it would have been another matter because, that's the law. But we cannot tolerate that sort of behavior. So there was no long period of counseling. There was no counseling at all. But we've had a number of people who had one issue or another that required a long period of counseling that in some cases worked. I'm not going to name people's names other than Waco Tohausen, whose name should be mentioned. But some of the people in these situations, what they were doing was disturbing the serenity of the tradition, or other comparable things, not necessarily things that had any laws against them, but they violated our internal rules. But they didn't get thrown out without a lot of counseling. And this is what you do when you're in a position of leadership. You try to resolve matters, not throw temper tantrums, not just lash out at people. If you're a leader and you're lashing out at people, you're not a leader at all. It's not what you do. You should always attempt first to find diplomatic solutions. Now, sometimes people won't respond to that. That may be different, but you try. Hello to Alicia in the chat room. Hello to Brian. Hello to Kelvin in the chat room. And Brian says, discourse and conversation is normal in my opinion. It's normal in my opinion too. And you should always be respectful in your conversations. But even a heated conversation is not a reason to punish someone in an organization. And I'm referring to my successor, Stephanie Neal, in these conversations. I am utterly ashamed of her behavior. I am more than let down by her behavior. I am ashamed to have nurtured her career so long, to have taught her so long, and see her behave so badly behind closed doors. So there, I've said it, and take it for what it's worth. She, in my opinion, has betrayed the character of what one should bring to leadership. And I'm very disenchanted by that. I don't think I've ever felt as let down as I feel by that. And these are why. Because if you're wondering why, and Lilith says, Stephanie Leon, yes. Yes, that's exactly who I'm referring to, Lilith. And if you ask me why, I've already told you. I feel utterly let down, utterly betrayed, to be blunt. So with that, we've come to the end of our half hour. It's a heck of a place to leave it, but I think that when you're in a position of leadership, much is expected from you. And I think it's only right that it should be. And I think that, I never objected to people who criticized things that I did. I could indicate situations, most of you wouldn't know them. But those of you who remember Davron, obviously we were butting heads long before the things he had done became clear. But as long as it was only butting heads, he had every right to butt heads with me. long as he accepted um, the chain of command in the organization, he had every right to disagree with things. The aforementioned gentleman of Spiral Lake Temple, he had every right to say he didn't think I was doing things the way he would do them, the way he thought they should be done. Everyone had that right. Now, there were certain other things that some of these people did that were not appropriate, not correct, but just disagreeing with people should not be a career ender. And you should always seek out diplomatic solutions, especially when they're handed to you on a silver platter. But Calvin says, learn to agree to disagree and move on with peace and love. Yes, especially when it's obvious you can achieve this end. It just totally baffles me why certain things have been done as they were done. And I never expected the actions in my own direction that have been taken. I think it's unfortunate. Doesn't affect me. I mean, I am retired in office. I will stand on that, but I absolutely did intend to retire and go on with my own life. And that's exactly what I intend to do. And I retired in office and will continue in that vein as well, no matter what anyone else does. But I was not intended to do anything but be broken and ruined by certain acts that were taken and sidelined from the situation being discussed. And I can only speculate people are a little surprised that didn't happen. But nobody ever made money betting I was going to go away. And today is not going to be that day. Except that we're at the end of our half hour, so I do have to go away till tomorrow. But I love you all. I thank you for being here. I realize I've been a little self-indulgent in some of these programs in talking about these issues, but I also feel that they actually affect all of us. Just most people have not known they're happening. And so I felt it perhaps better to go ahead and mention it. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and let us close with our prayer. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to continue to be with us and to guide us as you always have. Help us to move forward in peace and love, and to resolve with love and with diplomacy difficulties that arise in our lives, and to always find the best way forward, not the most expedient way forward. Beloved ones, we thank you with great love and with respect, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you with great love for being here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and may you be blessed now and always.